Hello, and welcome to Law Talk. My name is John Celebrezzi, and I'm the co-founder of the Celebrezzi-Zangi Community Legal Education Project, as we call it, CZ-CLEP for short. Our organization provides continuing education about the judiciary and legislature to attorneys, judges, government officials, and the general public. As a career educator, I recognize early on how important legal matters are and how they impact our lives. I am the nephew of the late Anthony J. Celebrezzi, who was the popular 5-term mayor of Cleveland and a member of President Kennedy's cabinets. As a tribute to his lifetime commitment to the legal process, we dedicate this show.
John's special guest today is Kelly Ranttila. Kelly is originally from Canfield, Ohio. Kelly is currently a second-year law student. She graduated magna cum laude from Ashland University with her bachelor's degree in International Political Studies and Political Science. Her involvement at the law school includes newly elected editor-in-chief of the Law Review, treasurer of the Federalist Society, advocate of the ABA Moot Court team. Kelly worked in the World's Justice Project in Washington, D.C., and will work for the Ohio Attorney General's office this coming summer. Let's join John now and his special guest.
Kelly, welcome to Law Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. You've had quite a year, haven't you?
It's been a good year, a busy one, but a good year.
I'll bet it has. I had the pleasure of watching you compete in this year's Anthony J. Celebrezzi Moot Court competition. Matter of fact, they even brought a prop along. I kept the brochure, and there you are. How do you pronounce your last name?
Ranttila.
Ranttila. Okay, Kelly. Well, and there's a picture of my Uncle Tony, who this particular show is done in honor of. And you had a Supreme Court justice there and some pretty important people judging you. And I must say you did a fine job.
Well, thank you. It was a great experience.
Well, I can't congratulate you enough.
Thank you.
Let's kind of start at a little bit about you, Kelly. I've got my trusty clipboard here. The reason I do that is so I don't forget anything, okay? So if you see me reading, that's just, I just
that's
don't
okay.
take it out. So can you, for the benefit of my viewers, can you tell us a little bit about where you are in law school and maybe a bit about your background that got you to law school?
Sure. So I will be starting my third year at Ohio Northern University's law school. I did my undergraduate degree at Ashland University in Ohio. I majored in political science and international political studies. When I got done, towards the end of my degree, I really thought law school would be the best option for me. Got into Ohio Northern, really wanted a small town sort of feel, close relationship with my professors, so it was the perfect fit for me. And I've loved my past 2 years, and I'm looking forward to my third year.
Great. Well, your third year will be a good one. As a law school graduate myself, that'll be your best one, but even though you've had some things happen, you are pretty impressive. Okay, you mentioned a small school setting. Actually, Ashland was a smaller college,
yes,
as was Ohio Northern University. Okay, obviously you know my uncle Anthony J. Celebrezzi was Ohio Northern graduate going back to about 1936.
Wow.
And this competition is named after him. So, as I mentioned to you earlier, there was a time actually that he personally judged them. Well, let's talk about the competition. I mean, it's really pretty interesting, and this has been happening the last few years, Kelly. You guys argue it somewhere in the late winter, early spring, which I think this year, I got my prop here, March 28th, 2018.
Yes.
So yeah, it was spring, but it was cold that day. But we are, and it is a real Supreme Court case that you argued.
Yes.
And we generally don't know the results of the case even by the time of the show. But in your case, the court has actually ruled, correct?
They have, yes.
And they ruled for who?
They actually ruled for the petitioner, so for my opposing counsel.
That's pretty interesting. They ruled for the petitioner, but you were not. You were the respondent,
That's
right?
correct, yes.
And so you won the competition, but the Supreme Court ruled the other way.
They disagreed with me.
So, well, okay, well, I don't know what to tell you about that, but they're entitled to their opinion,
yes.
Huh? Okay. When is this competition, it's held every year, but when do you actually get started on it? What part of the school year?
Yeah, so generally about the middle of March, we get the assignment, we'll get the case, usually an upcoming Supreme Court case where the oral argument has been heard, but the justices haven't made their final. So we were able to look at the briefs by the different sides, listen to the oral argument, listen to the judge's questions, and then we had about a weekend to prepare for the first round.
Boy, you really don't have too much time then, do you?
Not this year, we did not.
No, I guess not. Well, you did a beautiful job.
Oh, thanks.
I understand your motivation to go to Ohio Northern is, frankly, I didn't graduate from Ohio Northern. We're one of my favorite law schools. And, everything you mentioned about it, I personally know many of the professors and the deans. But I guess maybe a question germane to why you picked the school, but bringing it to another level. Why did you choose to participate? I mean, this is an awful lot of work on top of everything else you got to do as a law student.
For the experience. So I am a part of our moot court team at Ohio Northern. We had just finished a competition in Boston earlier in March. I'm part of the American Bar Association constitutional law team for ONU, and that had ended. So I really was looking for another opportunity to practice my oral advocacies, skills, to practice researching, and to get up in front of people and argue.
Okay, well, that you got. But I certainly laud you. I mean, again, let's say being a law student myself, I've come to realize just how time-consuming just being a law student, and the fact that you were able to do all these things that you should be commended for.
Well, thank you.
Okay, so you get the briefs coming into March. There's two sides to every suit, so I'll let you talk about the specifics of it, but I'll put out a little bit of a tidbit for my viewers. This case has to do with a baker. And believe it or not, somebody who bakes cakes. And that's correct, right?
Yes, yeah.
And the issue is, if I say this wrong, correct me, but the issue is his right as a baker to refuse to bake a cake for, in this case, two gentlemen, I believe, that wanted to be married.
Yes.
And the baker was not a believer. His religion didn't recognize gay marriage. Okay, so there you have it. I mean, in a nutshell, you'll do better than I will, of course. But I guess you were the person who represented kind of the state, right?
Yes, yeah, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission that told Mr. Phillips, the baker, he was required to bake this wedding cake for the couple and the couple themselves.
Okay. All right, so for the benefit of my viewers, this case is not in Ohio, it was in Colorado, wasn't it?
It was.
In Colorado. But in Colorado, I mean, regardless what they call it, I mean, our basic place where a case like this, I think, would start might be the Common Pleas Court, go to the Court of Appeals. And I've had Common Pleas judges on the show numerous times, and appellant judge, and the Supreme Court justice. Okay, so all of that happened in Colorado, right?
It did.
Okay, and every time the state courts got done, they disagreed with the baker.
That's correct.
Okay, so they agreed with the gay couple.
Yes.
He needs to bake this cake for you. And that was the advocacy that your role.
Yeah, in the preliminary round, in the final round, I argued on behalf of the couple for the state. In the semifinal rounds, I argued for Mr. Phillips. But
so you went both ways.
I went both, I did both sides.
And you've had other students have told me this in the past, and I always make this equation, which may not even be correct, but I once knew a police officer, actually he was the chief of police where I was assistant superintendent, and we were talking about training with firearms, and the analogy was a police officer needs to actually know how to shoot a gun with both hands. Well, it's kind of like what happened to you here. You've actually seen it on both sides.
Yes, yes.
That's good preparation?
It was great preparation, yes. Really helped me get a feel, especially in the final round, to have argued the opposite side, to really understand my opposing counsel's arguments.
Well, I guess that makes sense, even though having watched you argue, I got to tell you, I didn't much notice any interest on your part on the baker's side. I mean, you well, I mean, you were playing a role, but you played it very well.
Well, thank you.
Well, and you won. I mean, so they thought you were more persuasive than your counterpart. But in actuality, the United States Supreme Court saw it a different way.
That's correct. Yeah.
How about that? Let's talk about. I'm going to dig in here and give you some time to actually, tell my viewers about the specifics of the case. But they now know that the Baker won, at least for now, and maybe not all issues were covered, but the petitioner, the guy that brought the case, used our court system for what he needed to use it for. But in the end, regardless of state courts that ruled against him, the high court, and there's no more after this one, went his way. That's a pretty interesting way this all worked out.
Yes.
I gotta say, I've been doing this with Ohio Northern law students for several years. I think this is the only time I ever saw it happen, but I will put the caveat in there. Most of the time, Kelly, by the time the winner gets here to be on my show, like you are, we don't know the result. I mean, usually it's the summer immediately following, but in this year, we knew. Okay, all right. So moving on. Let's talk about your judges. I've seen it judged by numerous people through the years. There was a time actually when my uncle, Anthony J. Celebrezzi, who it's named after, he was a member of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in the United States. Well, the court, one below the Supreme Court, and he actually went, I think, into the late 90s. He was still coming every year until finally his health got to the point that he couldn't do it. He passed away in 1998. So at one time, albeit it's named after him, he was the judge. But who were the judges you had?
So this year we had Judge Daniel Padden from Guernsey County, Judge William Zimmerman from the 3rd District Court of Appeals, and then Justice Judith French from the Ohio Supreme Court. Oh,
so you had a member of the Ohio Supreme Court there?
Yes.
All right. The gentleman from Guernsey County, was that a common pleas judge?
Yes.
So you were well represented. You had common pleas, which would be the trial court where this thing started. The only thing was the Colorado court. And then trial court in Colorado says, no, we think the Baker don't have this right. Then their appellate court, yeah, we agree with the trial court. And apparently went to a Supreme Court of some kind in Colorado, didn't it?
It did not go to the Colorado Supreme Court. They denied hearing the case. I
see.
So they appealed right from the Colorado appellate level straight to the United States Supreme Court.
And they can do that. They could pick what they want to hear. So that's how it managed to find its way to the United States Supreme Court.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, well, I saw the judges come out. I saw the judges go back into the little room that's actually named in honor of my uncle there. And they did the deliberation. They came out, and congratulations to you. You won, and I approached and invited you to come. So
I appreciate it.
As they say, that part is history. But we don't know exactly what was said behind closed doors back there. But we do know we won. Okay, so now, I think people will be talking about this case for a while. I really do. I mean, I read a piece in the Plain Dealer, and I deliberately on my clipboard, and I sent this to you, what I'm about ready to read my readers, because I wanted it'd be the focus of what we're going to talk about today. But you're pretty close to Case Western Reserve here in your Medina County.
Yes.
But there's a professor at Case Western by the name of Jonathan Adler, and from Case, and he said, when the opinion came out, Kennedy's opinion largely avoided broader questions implicated by the case and did not definitively resolve whether service providers or artisans may be required to create works for events contrary to their religious beliefs. Okay, I understand it's a mouthful, but for you who have lived both sides of this thing, I think if anybody in the world's got what the professor was trying to say, and I think it might be you. All right, so what do you make of that?
So I think he's right. And if you look at the transcripts or listen to the oral argument where the opposing counsel, attorneys on both sides are arguing and the justices are asking questions, they really wanted to figure out, is the baker, when he bakes a cake, engaging in free speech that can't be compelled? The government can't tell him, you must bake a cake for a certain person. And is there a religious freedom issue at stake? If he has to bake the cake, are his personal tenets of faith being violated since he did not agree with same-sex marriage? The court's opinion didn't look at those issues. It looked at the Colorado Civil Rights Commission's sort of animus towards Mr. Phillips, towards the baker, and the sort of disparaging remarks they made about him and his faith as the reason to rule in his favor. So I was pretty surprised that they, spent time in the oral argument asking about free speech, freedom of religion, and then didn't touch on those issues in the actual case decision.
That's really significant.
Mm-hmm.
Believe me, I'm now understanding it better than before I asked you this question. But a civil rights commission in the state of Colorado, by its name alone, suggests they are there to protect the citizens of Colorado from abuses of civil rights.
That's correct.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. And throughout the whole thing, trial level and appellate level, they said, sorry, Mr. Baker, but that gay couple has the right. Their civil rights are being violated if you don't bake that cake for them. That's kind of, have I got it right?
Yes, yes.
All right. Okay. Weren't they just doing their job?
Somewhat, yes. But if you look at maybe the record or the transcript of those meetings that they had when discussing the baker and the couple and the who should they find in favor of, they made some disparaging remarks about the baker and that his faith shouldn't be, ever a reason to deny selling someone a product. And the Supreme Court was very unhappy with those remarks that they had made, especially because even though they have the purpose of making sure that people's rights are protected, especially protected classes, such as people with minority races or with different sexual orientations, they have to balance that against everyone's freedom of speech and freedom of religion. So when the court looked at those disparaging remarks, and I think especially in light of Justice Kennedy's prior decision in Obergefell v. Hodges, the decision that made gay marriage legal across the United States.
I see.
In that decision, Justice Kennedy states, people who have beliefs that gay marriage is not appropriate or it maybe is immoral, those people still hold honest beliefs that are part of their faith, and that those beliefs, while they don't have to be part of the public sphere because gay marriage is legal, they should still be respected as valid. So I think that what Justice Kennedy and what the majority saw was a disrespect of the baker by the council, by the Civil Rights Commission.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, I guess civil rights covers a lot of ground, but looking at it narrowly from apparently the way the trial court and the appellate court was, no, you violated the gay couple's civil rights, and the very justice that wrote the opinion that permitted, is that what you're saying? Permitted
gay marriage. In this case, he wrote the opinion in the baker's favor.
Yeah, and it did, but they cited the case that was also a Supreme Court case just a few years ago.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
That said gay marriage in our country is it's illegal.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, just married is heterosexual.
Fundamental right, and it's
Fundamental right.
Yes.
Okay, the big one, like you learn an old constitutional law.
That's yes.
Nobody trumps a constitutional right. Now that leads me to another question. Okay, you have a fundamental right. Two boys or two girls want to get married to each other. Mm-hmm. That's a form of gay marriage, perfectly acceptable by a Supreme Court decision. But having those rights, those folks, plus me and you, still have the right to freedom of religion, mm-hmm. freedom of speech, and all that good stuff that comes in the First Amendment. Well, I'm not smart enough to second guess the Supreme Court of the United States, but it does sort of beg a question. This thing might not be done.
I think you're right. There's another case that's coming up through the courts about a florist whose denied providing flower arrangements for a same-sex wedding. So the decision here doesn't provide any guidance as to whether she was right or wrong to deny the service to a same-sex couple.
Boy, Kelly, this is going to get interesting because now we're done with the cake baker, so now we're talking about the florist. We can wind our way into wedding planners, disc jockeys. There's a lot of stuff that goes along with a wedding. Just ask any dad that ever paid for one. All right. Okay, so you don't think it's done?
I don't think it's done. I think the guidance we got from the court this time was just that the process needs to not be discriminatory or maybe mean towards the retailers, but we don't know what counts as free speech and what doesn't.
Well, then I guess the watchword for those people who sit on civil rights commissions is when you submit your transcripts, be careful what you say on the record, because the justices are taking this all pretty seriously. This surprise you?
I think I was surprised that they avoided those issues when they spent so much time thinking about them in the oral argument. But I'm not surprised that they came up with such a narrow decision as to only apply to the baker, to Mr. Phillips. I don't think the court wanted to make a sweeping decision, especially when there are so many industries that would be impacted.
Sure. There's more to come. Was it 5-4?
It was not. It was 7-2.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And I think that goes back to the fact it was so narrowly decided.
Yeah.
It really only applies to Mr. Phillips.
Well, that makes sense, because, there's generally on the ones where they're tugging at each other, it'll come out 5-4, but 7-2.
7-2. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think you're right.
Not on partisan lines.
We keep your eye on wedding preparations for future gay marriage. Wow, okay. When you argued the other way,
yes,
when you were on the other side, so you were the petitioner. Well, I watched you work on this side, so I have no reason to believe that you sloughed off on that side. You wouldn't have got as far in a competition if you didn't. So, you argued that in a zealous fashion. While you were doing that, now I could ask you, it's over with now. Did you really believe you had a chance of winning on that side?
It's a much harder argument to make in person. So I think it's a little bit different when you're writing an argument. You can be a little more technical, but when you get up in front of judges or your peers and make the argument, it's much harder to make the petitioner's argument. You're contending with past history where we as a country have decided that you can't deny service of maybe food service or service of goods to people based on their race. And the responding side, the side I argued at the end, is going to point those things out. So you have to try and make a distinction, try and flesh out a difference. That we've said that denying service to people based on their race is not acceptable, but this is somehow different, and that's a very hard case to make, especially when you're contending with that precedent, that case precedent.
Well, obviously the lawyers who had the opportunity to do this were able to do that.
Yes.
And
yes.
So that's how we get. Okay, shifting gears as the clock is running out, but certainly a very interesting topic, Kelly. What's your future plans after law school? What's next in your life?
So I'm looking forward very much to my last year, to doing some more arguing, some more moot court competitions, but I do plan to stay in Ohio, be taking the bar here. Looking to work hopefully in government. I currently have an internship at the Attorney General's office down in Columbus, the Ohio Attorney General.
What are you doing there?
I work in the constitutional offices section, so we represent the constitutional office holders like the governor and General Assembly. So I really like that kind of work. I'd love the chance to argue in my future career, to do more things like I got the chance to do with this competition.
Okay, well, it sounds to me like you got a pretty good plan. Okay, if I'm correct on my time, next month will be July, right?
Yes.
And not this July, enjoy this July, but next July you will be an extremely busy person.
I will.
you will be in the throes of the bar exam, which, as I remember it, I try to repress as much as I can, but it's 3 days, and it's a difficult experience, but I'm sure you'll do just fine at it.
I'm looking forward to the school year, maybe not the bar prep.
No, I think we all were in that position. But by way of advice, though, I mean, the first year is tough. I mean, it was for every law student I've ever known, including myself. But by the time you get to your third year, and particularly in Ohio Northern, where you kind of got to know a lot of your professors,
Absolutely.
you could relax somewhat, and I think you'll very much enjoy it. And then the bar exam's the bar exam. I mean, it's just something, it's a rite of passage. So you'll take it in July, and you'll know maybe by Halloween whether you passed it. Kelly, thank you so much for being my guest on Law
Thank you for
Talk.
having me.
Comments made by John's guest on Law Talk are solely those of his guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of Celebrezze Zangi Community Legal Education Project. To view this show and others, go to www.czclep.org. In the Wadsworth area, a complete listing of dates and times of this broadcast, tune in to WCTV Channel 15 or log on to wadsworthcity.com and follow the links to WCTV.
At CZClep, we're devoted to the education of today's legal issues. Fueled by the public's keen interest in our legal system and current events, CZClep is dedicated to the educational venues aimed at enhancing the understanding by all citizens, regardless of age, education, occupation, or wealth.
A function of the Celebrezze Zangi Community Legal Education Project.